Hello and welcome to this video on migrating from Team Foundation version control to Git. We've been talking a lot about Git, having seen the advantages. Should you make up your mind to move ahead from Team Foundation version control to Git, then this video should help you plan for that migration. There are two kinds of migration that can be done. We'll discuss both the migrations and weigh the pros and cons of both approach. Then we'll look at a demo of how to actually do the migration. Now there are two types of migration. The first type is called as migrating the tip. As the name indicates, you're not carrying forward any history from your Team Foundation version control repository. You're simply taking the last version of the code and setting that up in Git. The second option is to take the entire history across from Team Foundation version control into Git. Is that the right thing to do? I would question it. The reason I say that is both Team Foundation version control and Git are fundamentally different. Team Foundation version control stores branches as individual folders. Changes are stored as chain sets, whereas Git works in a completely different way. So you're relying on the migration to kind of transform the history from that mechanism across into a mechanism that Git understands. Now, the tool will do a good job at it. It might not do the perfect job. Therefore, having learned from hands-on experience in the field, if you have an option of only migrating the tip, then that, to me, would feel like the right thing to do. In addition to that, I would also mention that this is a new opportunity. If you're moving across from Team Foundation version control into Git, to fully leverage all the benefits that Git offers, it might make sense to restructure your code base. Rather than having a monolithic application, how about breaking it down into smaller modules and breaking them out into separate Git repositories? And that becomes very hard to do if you try and take the history along with that migration. So, the two options that are available are doing with history, doing without history. So what we will do is, in the first demo, we'll cover how the product allows you to do the migration with the history. The limitation here within the product is that when you do the migration, you're only allowed to carry forward 180 days worth of history. So if you plan to carry more history across than that, then we'll have to look at the second demo, which is to use the command line for an open source tool to carry all of the history or selectively carry one branch over the other. Okay, so let's get right into the demo. So let's start off by opening up PowerShell and installing a utility called git-tfs. Now git-tfs is an open source utility that you can read up more about on GitHub, but it basically provides you a two-way bridge that can help you take changes from TFS, bring them in Git, and take changes from Git and push them back into TFS. So we're going to run a command to look at a list of all the TFVC-based code repositories that are available within our Azure DevOps instance. And as I run this command, you can see that in my Azure DevOps organization, I still have a few projects that are using Team Foundation version control. This one, the Team Rooms, is an extension that I wrote with a colleague, Utkarsh, a few years back. And we chose to use Team Foundation version control back then. Now you can see that this is quite an old repository. It's got a few branches in it as well. It seems like a good candidate to do the migration. So let's get into it, navigate back into Azure DevOps, search for the Team Rooms project. Open up the project. And looking at the history, you can see that the changes go back to 2015, so we haven't been actively developing this extension. Now, as you can see that there are a few branches here. I can see there's a source branch, and then for releases, there are several other branches. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to migrate the source branch across into Git. Now, the in-product experience that I talked about is natively available within Azure repos, where you can come in and say import repository, and it gives you an option to select the type of repository you want to import. If I select TFVC here, I can optionally specify the path to the branch that I want to migrate across. And by selecting the Migrate History option, I can select the duration of the history that I want to port across. Now in this case, as we've seen, we haven't made any changes since 2015, so there's not going to be much history that will come across as we migrate the source branch. So I'm going to leave it at 30 days. Let's call this teamrooms.git. The import process is kicked off. Great, since there wasn't much history to be ported across, the import process completes fairly quickly. Let's navigate into the Git repo that's been created. And we can see that there's one history item that's been ported across, but all of the source branch contents have been moved across into a Git repo. Excellent, right? Now, this was a fairly simple use case where we opted not to carry the history across. But should we decide to take the history across, and all of it maybe, then we have to look at the command line to do it, as the interface doesn't allow for porting more than 180 days worth of history. So let's go back into Azure PowerShell, PowerShell, not Azure PowerShell, just the native PowerShell, and so we've created ourselves a new folder called Team Rooms 1, and we're going to use git-tfs open source utility to download the code from TFVC and migrate the code across into Git. In order to do that, we'll have to run the following command. So let's look at what this command is doing. It's triggering the git-tfs workflow to clone the Team Rooms source branch in the Azure DevOps Geeks instance. If I run this command, considering it has to port the history across and all of it, this will take a good amount of time. So I'm going to let this run for a little bit and then come back and show you what operations are happening within the folder. So it's been working away for a while now, and you can see that it's starting to go through the individual historic commits that are available in the source branch and convert them into Git hashes. Let's navigate into the directory and see what's happening. As we go into the source folder, we see that there is a .git folder created, and then within that a subfolder W. If you open this W folder, you can see that it's basically creating an extract of the entire history, one change at a time, and then converting that history into the equivalent of Git. So this is going to take a bit of time to complete. Rather than wait for it, let me show you one that I've already prepared. Okay, so we're going to cancel this operation and look at a repository that I've already imported. This repository I have, let's navigate into it. Okay, let's look at the history. Now, as you can see here, rather than have just a couple of changes, it has the full-fledged history. And you can see that although it's done the export from the source branch, it's able to find the associations to the other related branches and draw that history out and present it in a graphical way, so we know some of the changes that are available in the source branch, which other branches did they originate from. So with that, let's look at the structure. So this is what the exported path looks like with full history. If you're generally happy with these changes, you could follow the workflow to add a new remote. And with that command, you can then push the changes back onto the server. So in this video here, we talked a little bit about the options when looking to migrate from TFVC to Git. The two options being tip migration and migration with full history. Azure Repos natively supports TFVC to Git migrations with the limitation of 180 days worth of history being exported. The other option is to use the command line tool git-tfs, which empowers you to go native and kind of explore the options of doing branch-based exports with full history.